Okay, hey, we're back on We Are Judging You. Our third partner, Zishan Samani, is joining us for this episode. Today we're going to talk about government censorship and the First Amendment, what it means for you. We've seen a lot of things in the news with the president, with ABC, and some other topics that we'll be discussing in this episode. And as usual, my other partner, Murtaza Sudawala, is here, looking very snazzy today, by the way. Is there any? Can you explain the process behind the hat Kofi combination? Did I say that right? Kofi?
The hat and the keffiyeh.
Keffiyeh, the keffiyeh.
So I'm a man of many different opinions and views, right? We joke about it. So I think these two probably have the biggest reaction, and since we're talking about censorship, people try to censor Trump MAGA hat and also the Palestinian keffiyeh. So I said, why not? Let's wear it for this episode.
Well, that's amazing. So we know where some of the panelists sit politically, right? But I guess, what do you guys want to do first? So we can do Jimmy Kimmel. That's a pretty big one right now. We can kind of talk about the First Amendment and sort of how it's been interpreted since the 60s by the Supreme Court. And then we can kind of bring up any other censorship issues. But the one that tickles my fancy is the Jimmy Kimmel stuff. Because everybody talks about that like that's a bona fide First Amendment issue. But it's a two-level issue sort of when you break it down legally. Okay? So the First Amendment prohibits state action, right? Which is governmental action in prohibiting protected speech. Okay? And there's a lot of speech that's protected as long as you're not inciting another to imminently commit violence or burn something down, shouting. I think the example we had in law school was shouting fire in a theater. That's an imminent, you're inciting people to get up, run around, be crazy, which could lead to violence. That's not going to be protected speech. But everything else that falls under that standard is going to be protected. So Jimmy Kimmel's back on the air. Thank goodness he's back on the air. I feel like when you break it down, you've got two levels going on. You've got ABC doing the action that it did to take him off the air, right? But then there's another level on why did ABC do that? And allegedly, there was some communication from the White House, maybe, or maybe it was some other government official that said, hey, we don't like what Kimmel is saying. Maybe he has no talent, but we hate what he's saying. We're going to pull your broadcast license if you don't do something about Kimmel. And so then you've got, that leads up to, state action, right? So in my view, hey, you've got, if that threat was made, then the threat of taking action on him, whether or not it's followed through with, right? That's enough to call it state action. That's enough. You're on your way to a First Amendment violation there. But then you have the second level, which is what ABC did, which is actually taking it seriously. And then making the private decision to cancel the show. I say that in air quotes because everybody's getting canceled these days. It's a decision that they, I think, properly reversed. But at the end of the day, the private censorship is not really subject to First Amendment regulation. It's only when the state takes action. And I don't think anybody's actually seen whatever the threat was from the state. I think it's been reported, but did you see anything about it?
No, I heard about, I think they said I don't know if the White House got particularly involved in this one. I think maybe Trump may have tweeted about it or put on Truth Social. But I think the FCC chair, the Federal Communications Commission, which is one of those alphabet soup organizations, but quite powerful because it does have control over broadcast licenses and stuff. So his name, Brendan Carr, and sort of, just came out and said, and again, I didn't even watch what the original joke was that Kimmel made. And again, my first reaction was Jimmy Who, because, I think, his time where he was a big deal has probably come and gone. It's been at least, 10 years, if not 20 years. I think, what did he start off on MTV or something, right, back in the day? But anyway, and that, I think there's a larger issue here, and which we'll talk about, right? So yeah, as George was talking about the analysis, what the government did, that's where the First Amendment comes into play, what private actions were taken. And I think really, as we'll discuss, I think a lot of what happened with Kimmel was you have somebody who was sort of, may have had a very big contract or may still have a big contract, and his ratings have plummeted, and I think this just sort of gave him life. I wouldn't put it beyond ABC to have created this controversy to sort of, prop up a sort of a has-been, anchor. I don't even know what the initial joke was. I've seen his humor, even when he was like in his heyday. I was like, seriously, this is the guy who's replacing like the David Letterman and the Johnny Carsons of the world. It was like, yeah, already. But again, he has a platform, and I think what's interesting is why the FCC came down and cracked down on this as hard as it could. This would have been a non-story, but for that fact, I think, right? I think, frankly, he was either suspended because they were, trying to mollify, just do a small thing. And we see it all the time in our cases, right? Civil and criminal, where you tell the person, hey, defendant, you may just want to shut up for a little bit, a few days, and what better way to shut them up than to do this temporary suspension? And we basically gauge how the public reacts. The public seemed to be in his favor. I don't know if his ratings are going to stay up. I don't even know how he did when he came back. But, this is
I think it was 6.2 or 6.8 million viewers. It was the highest ever.
Right. Which is like, yeah, exactly, right. It was like, it's great, right? Controversy, in Hollywood, that's what sells, right? So. But, just adding on to that, I think it'll be interesting to see how it continues, whether he's able to be relevant and make points. It was unfortunate, that the joke came in the humor of somebody who'd been killed. Charlie Kirk the week before. We've been watching all of that. We've been seeing the clampdown coming from a lot of different politicians saying, no one should be making jokes about them. Shutting down the organization that Charlie Kirk was involved with, TP USA, Turning Point USA. So that's like pretty big at college campuses, trying to shut them down or just say, try to avoid it. And it reminds me, actually, funnily enough, in high school, this whole incident, we were given in senior English to write a speech, a persuasive speech on a topic, and our teacher said, do not talk about, the one topic we couldn't talk about was abortion, trying to convince people whether abortion was right or wrong. So I was like in my pre-law days, trying to be a little bit of a rabble rouser. I said, you know what, let me do a speech on the right to talk about abortion, right? So every single time I said the word, I remember the teacher would look up and be like, what did he say? But the whole thing was about, First Amendment and right of censorship and how we destroy the community of ideas, when we shut somebody up, right? So I think this is interesting, it just gives me a flashback to like 30 years ago. But anyway, this is where we are.
Yeah, honestly, what my take on it is very, very similar to yours, but I'm actually glad that just for history's sake, for the sake of creating a precedent to follow, letting him back on, because for, a president to tweet something or an FCC chairman to make a public comment about something or to make a private threat or a public comment that gets taken as a threat, to get someone kicked off and, for them to lose their job. And really, it wasn't just him. There were hundreds of people that worked for that show, and they all would have lost their livelihood. And I don't remember anybody in recorded history getting fired when Malcolm X got assassinated or when, Martin Luther King got assassinated. So I think the Kirk assassination, that's definitely one for the books, definitely one to, heart goes out to his family, thoughts and prayers. However, I don't think people should be losing their livelihood over it. I think that's a whole nother step that we're taking, and to have it come from the government or the lead of a government agency, and then to have it sort of implemented by a private company, I think that sets a very dangerous precedent. That brings up, for me, like the Third Reich, with Goebbels coming up with all of his, pro-Nazi propaganda, and you had to follow it or you might actually get shot, right? So it's like, America is very anti that, and America's always changing. I think Constitution's a living document. That's sort of the beauty behind America. It's an experiment, but for the experiment to continue, things have to change with the times. And so there's always going to be people in power who don't like what the people who have not the power, what they're saying, doing, etc. And so the minority, the way we've set the country up is that the minority actually has a say, and it's a protected say. And so unless Kimmel is inciting violence or making threats of his own or yelling fire in the theater, I don't think he needs to lose his livelihood. So I think ABC actually did a good thing. And Disney, I'm still available if you want me for any of your shows. Voiceovers, that's like a huge thing. Voiceovers, I think I could do that quite well. But I'm a fan of ABC, always have been, and more, and of Disney. So it was good to see somebody have some sense somewhere by them making the right decision in a very difficult time. Because there's also the market share that they lost. They said that they lost something like 3 or 4 billion. People canceled Disney. And I think they own Hulu. People were canceling Hulu. So there was a financial impact also. So maybe some of those subscribers come back. But then I don't know if you guys heard, but Disney is raising if you have them, they're raising their rates now.
Oh, wow.
Like 10%, 15%, probably to make up for the billions that were lost when they cut Kimmel. But I think that's a step in the right direction. I think that a lot of people think that every time a company takes an action, that implicates the First Amendment. And really, it's only when the state government does it, city government does it, like a municipality, or when the federal government does it. That's going to implicate the First Amendment. And really, it's interesting the administration will be doing this because when President Trump was running, I recall him saying, I need the First Amendment. I am protected by the First Amendment. Right. You guys are punishing me for what I'm saying. Right. And now it seems like either the president or his appointees are making public or private threats, whatever you want to call it, that are being taken seriously by these huge companies. Right. So, I don't know.
So what are your thoughts?
I think you guys covered the broad spectrum of opinions here pretty well. It's interesting how Trump has, not even Trump, but his administration and the federal agencies have, adopted policies that push a certain reaction to certain speeches, to certain actions by whether it is, in this case, a comedian and a talk show host versus students and professors at universities, or people within even the business realm, and even lawyers and attorneys and law firms, and who they represent and what actions they take against potential, policies that the administration or other agencies have implemented. So it's interesting to see how the ripple effect, because it wasn't too long ago where protests and other protected speeches and rights have been essentially stifled because the administration does not condone or support certain viewpoints, and any speech against that viewpoint then is silenced one way or another. And this is an exact example of that, where somebody expressed their First Amendment right and was silenced, even though temporarily. And what kind of precedent, like George mentioned, what kind of precedent does this make for going forward, and how it is selectively used when it supports a certain position versus it is opposed to a certain position. So one question I have for you guys is, this is obviously this was the FCC and its actions or influence against obviously a large TV network. Where does this leave us when it comes to social media? Where does it apply to podcasts, right? Podcast hosts. There are thousands, if not millions, of podcasters out there that express their voices. Obviously, some are louder and more heard than others. but will they be attacked next? Right? Will platforms, online platforms, TikTok is in the process of an acquisition. How will that hurt free speech on certain topics that have, expressed, a number of ideas and positions that may, again, go against what the ruling position is at the time, right? Yeah. So how does this affect social media? How does it affect streaming, other broadcasts, and just censorship, as a whole?
So that's really interesting. I mean, that's a really good transition. When you mentioned social media, I was thinking, I mean, you're right. It's not, is this the precedent, the Kimmel thing? I don't think so. I think this has been, a strain of the U.S. political, thought for a while, right? Like, and I'm just thinking about the examples. Like, so before, right before George was talking about how Trump felt that he was being deplatformed, right? Like he wasn't able to speak, and the fake news and how everyone was like basically wouldn't listen to his point of view. So that then that was during the Biden administration. The Biden administration, when they came in, it was right like the 1 year into COVID, and they came down with the crackdown. I remember all the cases that were filed, people who were taken off of Facebook and weren't able to talk about ivermectin and the alternate treatments that are available for COVID. All the stories about China labs, doing the creating COVID and everything. So it happened, right? Like this is right now the Republicans. Hey, the sacred cow in a sense, is talking about conservative influencers. One was assassinated. It's a pretty big deal on the conservative side. It's a big deal on political violence, right? And maybe the thought was we need to clamp down on this before there's copycat assassins all over the country and whatever side, right? Maybe that was the thought process in the back of the head, like don't minimize the political violence, right? And I can imagine during Kennedy's time, I don't think any late night show would have made a joke about John F. Kennedy being assassinated, right? Or Martin Luther King for that matter. So that's part of it. Maybe it's changing mores, right, in America. Talked about the COVID and all the censorship that happened during that time. That didn't make it right. And in fact, probably is coming out. A lot of the stuff that was being put in alternate views was not that far off from the truth, right? Ivermectin and all of that. You go back, talking about MLK. The FBI had internal informants in the civil rights movement just to see what they were saying, what the internal plans of the Black civil rights movement, Nation of Islam, and in some cases being used to incite violence to then say, look at them, right? Same thing happened. There were reports that same thing happened with the January 6th protests. So there were people on the inside basically fomenting the violence when really it was just a speech and going to go protest to Congress that hey, they shouldn't certify the vote the way that they did. So anyway, I know there's a lot. Everyone can give examples. I think what we have as a nation, I would say is don't just pick and choose when it's your party that's doing this being censored and say, oh my God, this is fascism. It's pretty been universal, I think, from the very beginning. But going back to your point about social media before I go on too much of a tangent, it'll be interesting. I think the difference is, I was thinking about it, like back in the day, growing up in the 80s and the 90s, speech was coming from essentially on broadcast TV, maybe the newspapers, right? And then I think the beginning of the internet, right? The internet was basically just putting a newspaper online, right? You didn't really have free agents, mavericks who could talk about any influencers. You didn't have that back in the day. So all of your news, if you really got it, was from there, or you closed the the media, right? And you just talk to your friends and like-minded people about what's really going on, right? Now I feel like everyone and anyone can have, podcasts. I created this podcast. We all have social media. Anyone can be, an expert if they want to. Depends, how many followers they can get, kind of thing. So it'll be interesting to see how government does try to regulate, or is it just going to be the private sector that comes in and says, okay, you can say what you want, but don't expect to have a job if you said this, right? What do you guys think?
That's private censorship, right? And so just going back to the wonderful points Ishan made about social media. Okay, so TikTok, 14.5 billion acquisition, being acquired by, I think, a joint venture. And I'm not sure who all the players are in the joint venture, but it's going to be mostly American owned now, which is the exact same thing that the Chinese do in their country when you want to own property or a business or a social media company. It's majority Chinese ownership there, so it's not unheard of to do what's happening here. And I think it's all going to be housed on something called Aura, which is like I think it's run by Oracle, which is run by Larry Ellison, who is a big-time billionaire, probably one of the smartest business people on the planet at this point, but who also does a lot of business with the federal government. And so he's got billions and billions in federal contracts he's already done. And then I think they looked at it, they have billions and billions that haven't even like come to fruition yet. So this is like another joint venture that he's doing with the federal government. I think it could be a very good thing just to control the data, right, that's coming out. But I do think like TikTok should have internal protocols in place, just like Facebook does, Meta does, monitor for incitements, right? And shut down accounts that are being used to gather people in a place and then incite violence, okay? And a lot of times you can do it like on text message, WhatsApp, but social media and TikTok, like that's what all the kids are looking at. Like my 15-year-old uses TikTok, knows TikTok better than any, like she's an expert. I barely know the app. She's an expert on the app. That's what all her friends use too. And so I think it's important that all of their data be housed, you know, on American shores and make it be subject to American law. That's the other thing. If the data gets misused, how are you going to sue a Chinese company? That's hard to do unless they have sufficient contacts with the United States. But this is all in the cloud somewhere. So now it's going to be Aura's cloud, which is similar to like Microsoft's Azure product. These big servers where all this data is always stored and it's monitored. So I think that apparently the president has signed off on it, and he said that he will support the deal, which means it won't hit much opposition. But if it does go through, I think in the short term, it's very good, and the long term remains to be seen. Because TikTok can be used for a lot of First Amendment violations, right? And there could be lawsuits that come up. If you cancel my TikTok account, that's private censorship. You have to establish a government connection to really have a First Amendment violation. But if you violate their private protocols, you may be able to, if you violate their private protocols, you may be able to sue the company and then allege that really they're just a political actor for the government based on this huge contract that they're getting. So it's state action there. Please protect my First Amendment rights. That's what Facebook and Instagram and Meta, that's what they've been facing for years now. So there could be more litigation in the TikTok arena, but I do think along with Oracle coming in and having access to all the data, you got to know that there's going to be some level of sharing with the government. The relationship is too intertwined to believe that there's going to be some sort of a wall. And I'm okay with that because so much of our data is already shared with the government already. And I think that if you go online and you give your opinion, and if some agent reads it and says you're about to do something, there's an imminent threat or something in that, there have been a lot of attacks that have been prevented by government agents doing that. And I think we should let law enforcement do their job, but not over police. There can't be an over regulation of it, which is where lawyers come in. We kind of prevent that over regulation with lawsuits. So I think that piece is I think that's huge. Like TikTok was a very good example. There are other examples, but TikTok is sort of unfolding before our very eyes. And so, I mean, I don't hate everything the current administration is doing. I think there are some things that are being done right, and then I think there are some things that are just being done horribly wrong. Sorry, Donald. Yeah.
And how about, algorithmic moderation or content filtering or shadow banning certain accounts? So you wouldn't say, that may not be, data suppression or manipulating data for a certain, reason, but what if that change to the algorithm now starts pushing content of a certain ideology versus others? Does that rise to the level of censorship or private censorship?
No, I think that's a great topic. I mean, algorithm. Yeah, you're right. I'm wearing the number of people who post and Palestinians in Gaza. I mean, they get shadow banned all the time. It's like then they can't have the reach, and that's what social media is supposed to do, is like reach out. If you have a public profile, or you haven't locked it down. I mean, you're supposed to technically have, that's interesting because there was this whole topic that came up regarding whether media, internet, broadcast should be treated as like a purely private company who can choose to do business with whoever and whenever they want, right? As long as it's not false advertising or anything like that, right? So there's like this one thought that like the ABCs of the world or the TikToks of the world should be free to do whatever they want because they're private parties and they're not government, right? But I think what George is talking about, the level of interaction you have with the government, you're so large, right? Like no one can now say that probably have more interactions with Meta than you do with the government on an average day, just because if you have a phone and you're using it or social media, right? So there was this other theory, and it was pushed by the Republicans about treating media companies as common carriers, right? So like if you were trying to take a flight on United or Greyhound, they can't pick and choose and say, as long as you're paying the fees and you're not breaking their code of conduct, right? They have to give you a seat on the plane or on the bus, right? So that'll be interesting to see if this develops, right? And they're good and bad, I think, on both sides of looking at it in both ways, right? Because I reacted when Meta was forcing people off. They got a call from the Biden administration saying you need to deplatform. I think they even had an office of they called it some fancy government name, but it was basically the office of like deep propaganda, right? That's a problem, right? But then on the other side, it's like, then the social media companies go to the other extreme, depending on whoever's inside and whoever's influencing them. And it's really not the American government; it's really other governments, right? That come in, the Gulf countries or Europe. I mean, Europe has some pretty weird rules on First Amendment, right, or their equivalent. So I think it'll be interesting. I think that the play for the next decade will be how we establish. Must social media be like a common carrier and any view, as long as it's not illegal, is allowed? Or is it going to be, no, we're a private company, we're giving you access to our cloud, we're making all the contributions, you're not really paying anything, right, for being on it. Yeah. We're going to pick and choose what we want, because otherwise you end up in a situation like Twitter, right? Like Twitter was so big, but now when you get on it, it's like, it's like, and sometimes you're like, what, it's like, who's on it, right? Like, I feel like I'm at, anyway, so. Anyway, I stay to my TikTok, true to my TikTok. I just wanted to ruin. I was quite sad when they took it off for a night, right? Back in January. Remember that whole thing where they shut it down? Everyone thought they lost the app.
Well, my app actually sent me a notice it was going to be shut down at midnight, and all the kids were freaking out.
Right.
So I'm just like, okay, well, I guess all y'all are going to be back on IG. So.
That's the only way I found out about it was on Instagram. I didn't have a TikTok.
I can't even share like memes with people because they're on TikTok. And TikTok makes it so hard to view on your browser. So. Yeah. Anyways,
it's definitely for the kids. But join us for the next episode. We're still judging you every day. We're judging you too, Jimmy. We're judging you, Donald. We're judging the MAGA hat. We're judging everything here.
First Amendment, shut up.